Chapter 3. Dean Howe's young wife, Sarah, sat at the assembly line from 8 to 12 in the morning and then again from 1 to 5 in the afternoon, 5 days a week. She set 3 screws into the butt of the pinecone rifle. The woman next to her, her best friend and next-door neighbor, flipped the rifle over and set in another 3 screws. Becca Blair thought she had the more interesting task because on her side was the embossed pine cone. That was the emblem of the company, while Sarah Howe's side was smooth and unadorned. Becca explained, "The reason you got this job at all is because Mary Larkin died. She had a brain tumor, and I suffered with her through every damn day of it. And she had this place on the line, where I am right now. I had your place, then they brought you in, but they moved me up to Marie's place because I had the seniority. I had been here for 8 years, so they handed me the side of the pinecone on it. It wouldn't have been fair to give it to you, come in fresh like you did, you know. You probably wouldn't have appreciated the way I do. It would have caused unrest." Sarah said she understood and that it was fair that Becca should get to look at the pinecone all day. Everything in the factory was new to Sarah, and the strangest of all was the very notion of work, for she had never been able to find employment in the depressed economy of pinecone. She was sure that the factory was going to ruin what good looks she had left after 3 months of living with her mother-in-law. The girl was slender, above average height, with thick, dark hair that she had always arranged as simply as possible. Her smile was arch, and many people objected that it was mocking, but this was not so. Sarah's eyes were black, moved ceaselessly, and seemed altogether too intelligent to be wasted in pinecone. But wasted they were, and there were times that Sarah thought she'd rather have them put out entirely, rather than have them staring for 40 hours a week at 3 little screws being worked into the butt of a military rifle. But Sarah Howe was not responsible only for herself. She had 2 other people to think of now. She had just turned 20, but girls in Alabama, those without money, whose parents work in shops or are farmers, grow up quickly. She had been married to Dean Howell almost a year before he went into the army. They had known one another in high school, though Dean was a couple of years older, had dated once or twice, and then for no good reason had decided to get married as soon as Sarah had graduated. Perhaps it was that Sarah's parents had both died of different kinds of cancer within 6 months of one another, and Dean felt sorry for her, thus left all alone. Perhaps it was just that Dean wanted to spite his mother. Sarah and Dean had lived for a while in a trailer camp just outside the city limits of Pinecone, but Dean lost his job at the Piggly Wiggly supermarket because of a fight he had with one of the stock boys. Dean broke the stock boy's arm, and the boy was the son of the manager's first cousin. During the depressing season of his employment, Dean fell behind in payments on the trailer, and it was repossessed. He and Sarah were forced to move into town and share the house inhabited by Dean's widowed mother. Sarah was displeased with this setup because Josephine Howell had never liked her daughter-in-law and had tried to persuade her son not to marry at all. Now the woman maintained only that her son had made the wrong choice. She would be completely happy now, she claimed, if Dean had only married Jackie Madden when she was still available, because she had a sweet temper, could cook, and would stand to come into money when her grandmother died. Dean was not successful in obtaining work because his temper was known, and there were few jobs anyway. But when a place opened up on the assembly line at the plant, Dean's old hunting buddy, who was in charge of hiring at the plant, gave Sarah the job, and this eased their financial condition somewhat. Before he was able to find himself work, however, Dean was drafted into the army. He was sent to train at Fort Rucka because he had shown considerable mechanical aptitude on the intelligence test that the Army routinely administered. He was being trained in helicopter maintenance. It was virtually certain that he would be sent to Vietnam, for this was 1965, during the first great buildup of American forces in that part of Asia. Sarah lived alone with her mother-in-law now, and every day she thanked her stars that so good and kind of a woman was Becca Blair lived next door, so close that they could wave to one another out in their kitchen windows while washing dishes. It was not a happy life that Sarah Howell lived, but she had resigned herself to it as being no worse than she had ever imagined life would be, though certainly it was no better. Becca Blair was about 40, with harsh good looks. Her husband had run away more than 10 years before, and since that time Becca had lived alone, finishing off the payments on their house and raising their daughter. Margaret Blair was now 16 and in her junior year of high school, but in this time of her grass widowhood, for she had legally divorced her husband, Becca had not lacked for male companionship. Joe Howell despised her next-door neighbor and said at least twice a week that Becca Blair is no better than she has to be, and sometimes she's not even as good as that. But Becca Blair was a good friend to Sarah Howell, and with her good humor and unfailing spirit, had pretty much talked Sarah out of her depression about being left alone with Dean's mother. Becca said all the things about Joe Howell that Sarah thought but did not dare say herself. That old woman, Becca Blair would exclaim to Sarah on their way to work every morning. Mean as hell, that's prepared for her, with a rear end like the side of a Mack diesel, making you wait for her. Sarah, I don't see how you put up with it, making you wait on her like you was paid $40 a week to do that, and she don't do a thing all day long while you and me are twisting our fingers off at the plant. I see you at night, and I know you do the laundry. I see you hang out your sheets by the light of the moon, and I tell you, I don't see why you put up with it. She's not your mama, she's Dean's mama, and that's not the same thing at all. Well, said Sarah, she does let me live there rent-free. Honey, replied Becca, besides the fact that you buy all the food, she'd have you pay to live in that house with her? Doesn't seem like I have ever seen her standing on them two fat ankles of hers. Sarah laughed and felt better about her lot. Becca Blair was religious, but hers was a strange religion of fear and superstition. She wore charms about her neck and was afraid to step out of the house on certain days, lay shivering in bed at night of the fear of evil spirits in the pantry. There were partitions about shoulder high that separated the women on the assembly line. That was to keep them from talking to one another, supposedly. Though sustained conversation was impossible anyway because of the noise of the machinery in the conveyor belt. But of those partitions, Becca had placed with pins and thumbtacks and nails numerous Catholic artifacts, lithographed cards, a couple of rosaries, and even a tiny virtue with a finger of the Pietà surmounting a crude copy of Da Vinci's Last Supper. I tell you, Sarah, I tell you something, Becca would sometimes whisper to her friend. I'm scared as hell of going to hell. But she was never strong enough to give up her man or her weekend six-pack of beer for that fear. And she listened gratefully when Sarah would try to convince her that there were worse things than men and beer, like being mean at the heart, like Joe Howell.